Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley faced grueling questions from Congress in 2022, following the 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan and Russia's war in Ukraine. The two men have been under pressure from members of Congress. Congressman Matt Gaetz had a memorable clash with Secretary Austin, culminating in the Florida Republican saying to the Defense Secretary that he was, quote, embarrassed by your leadership. Democrats and Republicans grilled Secretary Austin and General Milley on Russia's war in Ukraine and the money the U.S. is providing for Ukraine's defense.
Secretary Austin, why should American taxpayers fund lectures at the National Defense University that promote socialism as a strategy to combat China?
It's the National Defense University is an academic institution, and I don't know of any such lecture. But
well, that's surprising because it was widely reported. The National Defense University had Thomas Piketty come, and this was the title of his lecture, Responding to China, the Case for Global Justice and Democratic Socialism. So now that you know that they did this, would you agree that embracing socialism is not an effective strategy to combat China?
Well, I certainly don't agree with embracing socialism. I think
so that means
I'm sorry. We're not going to do this. We're not going to let the guy say 4 words and still talk and then cut him off. We're just not.
I control the time, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, but you also have to be fair to the witnesses.
No, but I got the answer I wanted. I have a follow-up. My follow-up question is if we don't embrace it, then I guess why did the National Defense University put out a statement? Again, this is funded by U.S. taxpayers, saying in this talk, Mr. Piketty will argue that the right answer lies in ending Western arrogance and promoting a new emancipatory and egalitarian horizon on a global scale, a new form of democratic and participatory, ecological, and post-colonial socialism. So why would we invite people we don't agree with to evangelize views and values that we don't share at the National Defense University when we should be learning strategy about how to combat our enemies and make assessments that are accurate?
And we do learn a lot about strategy and about the military and about joint force development, and so that is our focus in these institutions. I don't know what the context of this particular or content of this particular speech was.
Mr. Secretary, I've shared with you the context. The context wasn't better understand socialism so we can defeat it. The context wasn't learn about it so that we can offer countermeasures. The concept was that it's time for socialism. And the reason I know that's the context is because the lecture was pulled from a book written by Thomas Piketty entitled Time for Socialism. And I just can't help but notice.
And so your question was whether or not
I control the time.
Your question
you guys
was
have been
whether or not
blowing
we
a lot of calls
socialism.
lately on
The
matters
answer
of
is no.
strategy, Mr. Secretary. You guys told us that Russia couldn't lose. You told us that the Taliban couldn't immediately win. And so I guess I'm wondering, what in the $773 billion that you're requesting today is going to help you make assessments that are accurate in the face of so many blown calls?
You've seen what's in our budget. You've seen how the budget matches the strategy, and so I'll let that speak for itself.
Well, I mean, I've also seen that we're behind, Mr. Secretary. We're behind in hypersonics. We failed to deter Russia. Last year, China
what do you mean we're behind in hypersonics? How do you?
Okay, who's ahead in hypersonics?
How do you make that assessment?
I don't know. I make that assessment because China is fielding hypersonic weapon systems and we are still developing them. I make that assessment because Russia actually used one. By the way, your own people brief us that we are behind and that China is winning. Are you aware of the briefings we get on hypersonics?
I am certainly aware of briefings that we provide to Congress.
But it's not just the hypersonic. It's all over the world. It's in Taiwan, where China last year flew more sorties than ever before. It's North Korea, on pace to shatter prior records, the number of missiles that they are testing. And so while everyone else in the world seems to be developing capabilities and being more strategic, we got time to embrace critical race theory at West Point, to embrace socialism at the National Defense University, to do mandatory pronoun training. Do you accept?
You know, it's again, this is the most capable, the most combat credible force in the world. It has been, and it will be so going forward.
Not if
And
we
this
continue
budget
down this
helps us
path.
to do that.
Not if we embrace
And
socialism.
The fact that you're embarrassed by your country, by
Oh,
your
no. I'm
military,
embarrassed by your leadership.
I'm sorry for
I am
that.
not embarrassed for my country. I wish
It's
we were
what
not
you're
losing
saying.
to China.
It's
I
what
wish
you're
we
saying.
You know what? That is so. That is so disgraceful that you would sit here and conflate your failures with the failures of the uniformed service members. You guys said that Russia would overrun Ukraine in 36 days. You said that the Taliban would be kept at bay for months. You totally blew those calls. And maybe we would be better at them if the National Defense University actually worked a little more on strategy and a little less on wokeism.
Has it occurred to you that Russia has not overrun Ukraine because of what we've done and our allies have done?
But that was
Have
baked
you ever
into your
even
flawed
thought about
assessment. That was baked into your flawed assessment. And so I saw that the Obama administration
fact that we
tried
helped
to
the
destroy
Ukrainians
our
was a
military
flawed
by
assessment?
starving it of resources, and it seems the Biden administration is trying to destroy our military by force-feeding it wokeism. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Keating is recognized. Mr. Banks is recognized for 5 minutes.
Secretary Austin, the New York Times this morning reported the daily average for COVID-19 cases in the U.S. is at 27,573, much less than the 0.0001% of the total U.S. population. With COVID cases at all-time lows, why are we still enforcing the COVID vaccine mandate on our military personnel?
We've seen variants of this virus, wane and then grow again, and so this is a medical readiness requirement, and it will remain so.
General Milley, during a moment of increased action from Russia to China, is it worth it? Is it worth sacrificing our end strength for vaccine mandates? Would you rather have a few extra battalions of unvaccinated soldiers or not have them at all because of this?
Thanks, Congressman. I don't think it's an either or. I think we're an organization that requires, and you're a veteran yourself, we get a lot of vaccinations. Anthrax is very, very low in out there, and we still get anthrax vaccinations and so on. So I think getting vaccinated is part of the readiness issue of the health of the force. The numbers are very low, by the way, of those that are refusing to be vaccinated, and they're even lower. I mean, it's tiny, the numbers that are actually being asked to process out. So I think it's manageable, and I think that I would prefer that everybody just go ahead and get vaccinated.
According to a CNN article on January 18th, the Army National Guard missed its goal by over 8,000, adding only 34,658 recruits for FY21.
Right.
The 2023 defense budget request just released by the administration reduces the size of the Army by 12,000 soldiers. Is the Army cutting their numbers because they know they can't recruit enough people to meet their quotas?
I've talked to General McConnell about it a couple of different times. I think two major factors. One is the population at large, those that are eligible to enter the military, those numbers are actually pretty low. So that's one point. It's the accessions challenge that's out there in recruiting on an annual basis. The second piece is that they want to reduce manpower in order to get save the money and recoup that into modernization efforts. Those are the two fundamental reasons that the Army is doing what they're doing.
General, is it a coincidence that the Army is moving forward with now involuntarily separating our soldiers and then offering a new $50,000 signing bonus to recruits who want to join the Army? And how much additional cost are we going to incur because of the increased recruiting bonuses to combat projected losses for unvaccinated military personnel?
I'd have to get back to you on a cost analysis in terms of the actual dollars relative to the bonus you mentioned, the $50,000 bonus. But again, I'd go back to, I checked with General McConnell just yesterday. The numbers are actually being compelled to depart the military is very, very small in the Army. And I think it's likewise in the other services as well. There is a recruiting challenge, though, for the Army. The other services are meeting their recruiting goals. They're on glide path for this fiscal year, but the Army is challenged, both Guard and active.
General Milley, on March 18th, the U.S. Army discharged 3 soldiers, the first time it has booted troops for failing to comply with the COVID-19 vaccine mandate. It's projected that 2,692 soldiers, the size of a couple of Army battalions, have not taken the vaccine and will likely be separated from the Army. Once again, how is this loss of personnel going to hurt the overall end strength of the Army?
I think if 2,000 are kicked out, I think that would hurt. But I think there's an issue of education here and persuasion. And making sure that these soldiers are making informed decisions.
As of March 3rd, Army commanders have relieved a total of 6 regular Army leaders including 2 battalion commanders, and issued 3,183 general officer written reprimands to regular Army soldiers for not taking the vaccination. How has this loss of leadership and focus on administrative burdens improved Army warfighting readiness and enhanced combat power?
Well, again, Congressman, I think that the idea of the health of the force, the readiness of the force, and getting a vaccination is a contributing factor to that, I think is fundamental to the overall readiness of the force. So I regret that commanders are getting relieved for things like that. I didn't know the numbers that you mentioned. I'll go back to the Army and get the actual data. But we are an institution that has a whole set of requirements in terms of the health of the force and shots and et cetera. And there's a policy, and our job is to enforce the policy.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Crow is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Back to
Senator
the chair.
Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, why don't we make our intelligence reports public?
We share as much as we can from our intel reports, but as you know, we have to be careful about protecting sources and methods,
Right.
so that we don't lose capability.
And would you agree that giving our adversaries access to our intel reports is a poor decision?
Exactly. I think
Okay.
that's something that we absolutely work to avoid.
Okay, and so then why did senior Biden officials hold nearly half a dozen meetings with top Chinese officials to give them information on Russian troop movements?
I don't know I don't have insights on any occurrences like that. So
Okay, it seems the Chinese called up their comrades in Russia and sent Moscow the intel that Biden staffers provided them. And it appears that U.S. officials knew Beijing gave the intel to Moscow. So I would imagine you do not support giving Russia our intelligence.
I am unfamiliar with the issue that you raised, but you are right. I do not support giving our adversaries.
All right, General Milley, under what circumstances, if any, have you advised intelligence sharing with Beijing?
Zero. Never.
Thank you. Given what we know now about how that subsequently shared information, this intelligence went to Moscow, what would you advise for similar scenarios going forward?
I don't think you should give intelligence to your adversary, period.
Thank you. What senior leader is ultimately responsible for this decision of intel sharing? Is it you? Is it Secretary Austin? Is it Jake Sullivan? Is it the president? Who is it?
I'll let my opinion is, I'll give you a couple answers to that. One is the Director of National Intelligence is responsible for all the intelligence agencies in the
National Intelligence.
DNI, Avril Haines. So that's the person who's technically responsible, but obviously the president is responsible for everything that the government does, the executive branch does. And then each of us are responsible within our areas of responsibility.
Okay. So under what authorities would we share our intelligence with Beijing?
I would ask that you ask these questions of the DNI. However, my knowledge of the system is that the president and/or the director of national intelligence, or perhaps the director of the CIA or something like that, does have authorities. But I don't know what those are specifically, and it's not something I can answer with accuracy.
So it's not a practice you approve of, but we do know that it has happened, correct?
I don't know that it's happened. I'm not aware of what you're talking about, actually.
Okay. We've talked a good bit about Afghanistan today. So did Biden's precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which really fed perceptions of America in retreat, did that play a role in shaping Putin's decision to invade Ukraine?
From the intelligence I've read, it's not clear. I think it certainly is possible, but I also know that Putin had aims on Ukraine long before the end of the war in Afghanistan. In fact,
I think we all know that.
Yeah.
And so he saw his opening, right?
Well, the forces were building up. They began to build up their forces in September, October. So
Right.
I think in order to do that, they would have had to have the plans and approval long before September, October.
Right. They have a habit of moving forward at the end of the Olympics. They did it in
Yes.
08, they did it in 14. We were watching, and the White House chose not to move forward. I want to ask you, you have both failed, and this comes to each of you, to share with us the budget line items for diversity and inclusion initiatives, and much less any way that you would tie those initiatives to war fighting. But public reporting has given us some insight into what is being spent and how some of that money has been spent. And Secretary Austin, earlier this year, there was a report that said the Department of Defense is studying the issue of allowing gender non-binary people to serve in the military. Is that true?
I am supportive of allowing any person that's eligible and can meet the qualifications to serve their country.
And who is involved in the study? Are uniformed military personnel involved?
I can't speak to at this point who's involved in any of the studies that we have ongoing, just off the top of my head, but I'll certainly take the question for you.
And what will the living arrangements be made for non-binary service members? Are you all going to come back to us and ask for an appropriation for housing?
Senator, any study that we do, it will certainly be transparent and make it available to you.
And what about gender fluid individuals? How will you handle a service member who identifies as male on some days and female on other days, or polygender
I won't
individuals?
I don't care to speculate on what we're going to ask you for, or what we're going to how we're going to qualify people. Again, some of this is in litigation in various states, and I think it's best to take your question for the record.
Okay. I have some questions, Mr. Chairman, that I'll submit for the record. But
Thank you,
Secretary
Senator.
Austin, I do have some questions on hypersonics.
Well, we will be going immediately, Senator Blackburn, into a classified session, and those questions I think could be answered there. Gentlemen, let me thank you for your testimony. We will adjourn the open hearing and reconstitute the committee in SV 217 at 12:30, and we'll at the
Will you not say the words win and victory when it comes to Ukraine? Senator Blumenthal just gave an impassioned speech about this. It's clear that it's what both parties want. I reviewed your written testimony. You talk about deterrence 29 times. You never once used the word win or victory in reference to Ukraine, nor does the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, the Vice President, the President. Have the words win and victory been purged from the administration's vocabulary when it comes to Ukraine?
The words win has certainly the word win has certainly not been purged from our vocabulary.
Do you want Ukraine to win, or do you want this war merely to end?
I think the chairman pointed out very accurately what a desired end state would be. Ukraine maintains its sovereignty and its ability to protect its country, defend itself. It maintains its government. Russia is weakened militarily, and Russia, from a geopolitical standpoint, is a pariah, and countries will not volunteer to align itself with Russia. Some of that will happen, but we can see those kind of things beginning to happen.
Okay, I thought that, the chairman's response to Senator Gillibrand was pretty good on this point about what Ukraine winning looked like, a free and independent Ukraine with sovereignty and control over its own territory. Does that include the territory that Russia or Russian proxies controlled in the Donbass as of February 24th, the day before the invasion?
I think it's appropriate to let President Zelensky and the government of Ukraine define what that is going forward.
Are you or anyone else in the administration discouraging President Zelensky or your counterparts from launching attacks that would involve taking back any part of the Donbass or the Crimea?
No.
Are you providing them intelligence to conduct such attacks?
We are providing them intelligence to conduct operations in in the Donbass. That's correct.
In the Donbass, on the territory that Russia or its proxies controlled before the invasion.
Yeah, and we want to make
offensive operations to reclaim their own territory. Are you providing that intelligence to
we
them?
want to make sure that's clear to our force, and so that updated guidance that goes out today. We'll make sure that that's clear.
Updated guidance. So that means that the current guidance has said don't provide that information.
Certainly, the current guidance was not clear in that regard, so we'll make sure it's clear.
I think this is part of what you've heard from both parties in this committee is that as much as we have done, we're still engaged in too many half measures. There's still too much hesitancy and tentativeness in our posture towards this war. And I just want to talk about our own posture. Admiral Richard testified to the committee that he had advised that we should go forward with a normal, routine, regularly scheduled test of our ICBMs. That test was postponed, and now it's been canceled. Why did you cancel that test, Mr. Secretary?
Well, we postponed it so that, again, we're at a very tenuous point. Wanted to make sure that we were doing prudent things and managing escalation. And we reached a point where I made the decision that we had postponed it to the degree that it was best to go ahead and cancel it. I would tell you that I am confident in our ability to maintain our programs and to stay on track and to provide a credible deterrence and to protect our allies and partners.
Well, but see, this is I'm confident in it as well. I'm confident because we do conduct these routine tests. We don't cancel them because Vladimir Putin has decided to invade one of his neighbors. And the fact that we postponed it and now we've canceled it because it's escalatory, to me just says to Vladimir Putin that we are nervous about what he's going to do, as opposed to trying to make him nervous about what Ukraine and America and NATO is going to do next. That this
If we were concerned about him being nervous,
this is a form of self-deterrence. I mean, the chairman has said this war could go on for years. If a missile test in March of 2022 is escalatory, is it going to be escalatory in 2023 and 24 and 25?
It really depends on what's going on at that point in time.
All right.
But if you look at, I know it's not lost on you, Senator, that we've rapidly deployed forces to the eastern flank. We pushed in a tremendous amount of security assistance to Ukraine, and none of those actions indicate that we're afraid of Mr. Putin.
All right. One final question for the chairman. General Milley, I constantly hear concerns about professional military education across the services, that it's not focused enough on rigorous, operationally focused education. There's too much things that are kind of beyond the core warfighter's domain, like, international studies or development economics. You put out a very strong memo on this in May of 2020. Unfortunately, I still hear that some of the schools are not implementing that fully. Could you talk to me a little bit about your concerns in that memo and what plans you have to make sure that that's driven down to the lowest level at our professional military education schools?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. Look, the U.S. military has two tasks: prepare for war and fight and win wars. That's it. And the PME is designed to do that. We issued out that guidance in 2020 to emphasize that, warfighting, operational skills, strategic thought, et cetera. And we do periodic reviews. I just got a report probably about a couple weeks ago, actually, that I had them. I said, how many contact hours do we do in the war colleges and the staff colleges? It come out to round figures just under 5,000. Did the math. My guys did the math, the analysis, and 80% of that time was spent on warfighting, operational art, and strategy. The others are spent on things like congressional engagement, public affairs, administrative tasks that you have to do to run the military. So it is focused. 80% of the time is focused on the warfighting skills necessary for command and leadership at the staff level at different organizations.
Okay,
Thank you, Senator Cotton.
I'd really like it to 100%. I bet the one thing you'd love to strike is congressional engagement.
No, it's an important.
Thank you, Senator Cotton.
Milley, let me start with you, if I could. Following Russia's first invasion of Ukraine back in 2014, Congress stood up the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which I hope has been of some help to the Ukrainians in the lead up to this most recent invasion. I want to ask you about that, what we can draw from that with regard to Taiwan and over in PACOM. If Congress were to enact a similar funding mechanism for Taiwan. Do you think that would help strengthen Taiwan's ability to defend itself against a potential invasion by China?
I do, yes.
And from a military perspective, is it fair to say that strengthening Taiwan's defenses would help bolster deterrence against China, number one, but also reduce the operational risk to American forces who might be called upon to help Taiwan in the event of an invasion?
Absolutely, yes.
This is, I agree with you, and thank you for those comments. This is why I think it's important to take that action right now and not to wait, get behind the 8 ball. I've introduced the Armed Taiwan Act, which would establish the Taiwan Security Assistance Initiative, modeled on what we did in Ukraine those years ago. And I hope the committee will take it up. I think it's an important initiative. Mr. Secretary, if I could switch to you, Secretary Austin. The Assistant Secretary for Defense, Mara Karlan, wrote prior to her confirmation, I'm going to quote her here so I get it right, that deterrence by denial should be prioritized when it comes to China and Taiwan in particular. And she went on, deterrence by cost imposition can complement but shouldn't supplant deterrence by denial when it comes to deterring China. And Assistant Secretary of Defense Eli Ratner has said something similar. He told the committee, with China as the pacing challenge, Taiwan is the pacing scenario, and that's driven by a strategy of denial. Okay, with that set up, here's my question to you. When it comes to the 2022 NDS and the NDS priorities, can you, and I'm aware we're in an unclassified setting here, but can you tell us that we will see in the unclassified summary of the NDS a commitment to deterrence by denial, especially when it comes to China and Taiwan?
Our defense strategy accounts for the things that you just highlighted, Senator, which is why both of my assistant secretaries have highlighted that. But yeah, that's in the strategy, and we'll make sure that our unclassified version of the strategy appropriately reflects what's in the strategy.
Good. So just to make sure I understand, when you say it's in the strategy, you mean
It's accounted for in the strategy.
Deterring by denial, deterrence by denial when it comes to China and Taiwan is in the strategy. Have I got that right?
That's right, and then I can entertain your other questions in the classified setting.
Great, but just fair enough. But just to close the loop on this, you said we would see that reflected in the unclassified summary when that's made available.
What I said was you'll see the unclassified summary reflect what's in the classified summary.
Okay.
We need to be mindful of what's transportable, what we can move to the unclassified session.
Okay. Good. Just staying on this theme here. Assistant Secretary Ratner has also testified that Taiwan is the pacing scenario. I think you've testified to that effect, Mr. Secretary. I know that General Milley has.
I said that China was a pacing challenge.
Okay, great. I think General Milley has said that the Taiwan scenario, the fait accompli scenario, is the pacing scenario. If I'm wrong about that, General, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You correct me. I know that Dr. Ratner has, so let's stick on that.
I've said it before.
Go ahead, General.
No, I've said that before, and that's the scenario. That's one of the scenarios that we use for force development and so on and so forth. But
thank you.
It is clearly the most important.
Thank you. So here is my question then to you, Mr. Secretary. Will we see that the Taiwan scenario, the danger of a fait accompli, will we see that in the unclassified summary of the 2022 NDS?
Again, I'll just say that the unclassified summary will reflect what's in the National Defense Strategy. In terms of specific wording, I won't commit to a specific wording at this point. So.
Could I get you to commit to this? Would you echo what General Milley just said, and that I assume your assistant secretaries reflect your views, but
that's exactly right. They do.
Okay, and so could you tell me in your own words, though, Mr. Secretary? I mean, let me ask you this way. I don't want to put the words in your mouth, so let me ask you: is it your view that the Taiwan fait accompli scenario is the pacing scenario, just as China is the pacing threat? Is that fair to say?
It is a pacing scenario, and I would say that our China policy has not changed.
My time has expired. I'll have a few more follow-up questions, and hopefully also in the classified setting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. I understand that as part of the U.S. deterrence measures up to and after the invasion of Ukraine, there are now 3 U.S. armored brigades forward deployed in Europe. That's the most.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. We have limited time, so I'm going to ask for a yes or no question, probably unless otherwise indicated. Secretary Austin, last week General Walters told this committee that in the months leading up to February 24th, he considered himself part of an interagency effort designed to deter and dissuade Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine. Did you share General Walters' goal, yes or no?
Well, I hope General Walters shared my goal since I'm the Secretary of Defense. And my objectives were to, number 1, defend this nation, number 2, make sure that we did everything possible to unify and defend NATO if required, number 3, flow security force assistance to Ukraine, and then number 4, manage escalation.
So the goal was not to deter Putin from invading Ukraine?
I've just laid out what my goals were, and certainly...
Which did not include deterring Putin from invading Ukraine, unless I missed it.
Well, it was an objective of the government to deter Putin, but as General Milley described, it's very difficult to do unless you put forces on the ground, and that's a decision that we made early in the effort here, that we're not going to put forces in Ukraine to fight Russia.
It was an objective of the government. You have just reminded us that you are an important person in that government apparatus, the Secretary of Defense. Was it the goal of your policy, or the government's policy for which you work, the President of the United States, to deter Putin from invading Ukraine? It
was a goal to deter him from invading Ukraine, and if he did invade, it was a goal, and still is a goal, to impose significant costs on Putin. And you're seeing that play out in ways that Putin never imagined. And you're seeing the Ukrainians resist Putin in incredible ways because we provided them some capability to do that, but also because they have the grit and the determination to fight to defend their country.
Totally agree with the grit and determination they've shown, which is remarkable. So the goal was to deter Putin. We did not achieve that goal. Putin invaded anyway on February 24th. Do you share the assessment General Milley gave a little bit ago that perhaps Putin was simply undeterrable, and therefore our campaign of deterrence was bound to fail?
I do not believe that our campaign has failed. This is still in progress. And
got it with respect
and there's
to
a price to be paid by
NATO.
by Putin for what he's done.
Got it. But we failed to deter Putin from invading Ukraine. I'm interested in whether you think there's anything we could have done, looking back, hindsight's 2020, in the months leading up to February 24th, to successfully deter him from invading Ukraine. And perhaps there isn't. I don't know. I'm just curious to get your opinion on it.
As General Milley pointed out, if we put forces into Ukraine to fight Putin, this would be a different story. But we made a decision that we weren't going to do that, and we made a decision for the right reason, and I support those decisions.
So I think that's actually a very important point, that perhaps if we had put hard power, American hard power, in the path of Putin, that would have been the only thing that could have deterred him. I guess what I mentioned, does that same analysis hold true with respect to Taiwan? Would putting American forces on Taiwan increase or decrease the likelihood that Xi Jinping would attempt an invasion?
Hypothetical. I think that it's not advisable to make direct comparisons between Ukraine and Taiwan. These are two completely different scenarios, two different theaters, and so.
So do you think then that what has happened in Ukraine is not connected, has not impacted Xi's calculus with respect to Taiwan?
No, I'm certain that, I don't want to speculate on what's in Mr. Xi's head, but certainly I think as the world looks at this, they've been impressed by the commitment, the resolve of many countries in the world to resist that kind of behavior.
Would it be too far to characterize your view as the commitment and resolve on display by the Ukrainians and our NATO allies has made an invasion of Taiwan less likely than it was likely than it was on February 23rd?
Is the commitment of the people of Taiwan
No. The commitment that you just referenced with respect to NATO and Ukraine had any impact on Xi's calculus in Taiwan and made an invasion more or less likely?
Well, again, I don't want to speculate on whether or not an invasion is likely or less likely. But again, I would say that we just need to be careful about making direct comparisons between what's going on in Ukraine and what could happen in Taiwan.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. We are going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to be back at, well, I guess that would make it 11:47. Mr. Khan.
As it pertains to risk, when do you think we'll have the risk assessment piece done?
Yeah, that's my responsibility to get that done, get it submitted to the Secretary and the President. Probably, my guess is in the next couple of weeks.
And then, okay.
Yeah.
If you go through the risk...
And that gets submitted to you as well. It's not just to the Secretary and the President.
Thank you. If in that risk assessment we find some glaring risks that maybe we didn't foresee, at that time I'm assuming we will make some changes to the budget?
That's part of the idea, is to submit it to the Secretary and the President and to the Congress, that if there are errors or glaring errors.
But not errors, but significant risk.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Significant risk has to be covered by the mitigating factors of the budget.
Yeah. I'm trying to wrap my head around how we put together a budget, but we don't really have a good risk assessment. Am I not understanding that correctly?
No, we do, well, I participate in the budget, and my staff does as well. So there is a iterative process of risk assessment throughout.
So we have a general idea. Okay, thank you, sir. Then I need some clarification from both of you on the President's budget requests for combat vehicles. Can you explain the Army's rationale for the precipitous drop in vehicle procurement, specifically the Abrams tank, and what risks are we incurring with that drop in procurement of the Abrams tanks?
Well, first, we've got about 4,000 or 5,000 tanks in the inventory. So again, it's relative to the national defense strategy, and we are optimizing the military for a fight that'll occur sometime, if it occurs at all, hopefully it never does, in the 2030s. And tanks may or may not, probably not, play a very significant role in a war against China in the 2030s. What will play a really significant role will be space and cyber, but also air defense systems, long-range precision fires, naval capabilities, and air capabilities, and
so we just
subforce.
don't see a ground war,
with
so
China,
to speak.
The ground will have the ground forces, Marine and Army, will play an important role, but the dominant role will be played by the air and maritime forces.
With that, then, the Air Force is the oldest, smallest, and least ready in its entire history. The Air Force leadership has repeatedly explained that they need to procure at least 72 fighter aircraft. However, in 23 DoD budget cuts the Air Force new tactical combat aircraft only to buy 57. So with the future being in air and space where we really need, why are we not fulfilling the 72? Why are we only procuring 57 if that's the future?
I thought it was, well,
Maybe I
minor point, I thought it was 61, but.
Well, let's even say it's 61. It's still less than what has been requested, right?
Yeah, the Air Force opted to want to buy and purchase and return that money to build the Block 4 F-35, which is the most advanced of the versions, right? So the ones that are being chosen not to buy, those are Block 3s. So we want to get the most advanced versions of these aircraft. The F-35 is going to be the quarterback of the joint force in a fight in the Western Pacific. That aircraft is critical, and we want the most modern capabilities, and that's what we're purchasing.
So we're taking the same money, we're just deferring it to a different
That's the idea behind what C.Q. Brown and Secretary of the Air Force have decided to do.
Okay. Right. And just an overall question in my last minute is, it appears with inflation being, 8% and our budget being less than inflation, we've all talked about it, we're not keeping up with inflation. One of the risks that I'm assuming that we're assessing is the risks on how we look to our adversaries and our allies in terms of our budget weakness. And I say that is if I look at China, for example, which is one of our major adversaries, right? They are spending, maybe even overspending, some could argue. We are cutting back. What message do you think that sends to our allies and adversaries, sir?
Yeah, so I
Either
don't,
one.
I don't think
Either.
I don't think we're cutting back. I think this is a substantial budget. $700 $750 billion is a lot of money. The Chinese are spending about $560 billion or so on their announced budget. If you factor in things like
And I apologize, the lady's time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Horsford is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. Secretary Austin, it's my understanding that the Air Force intends to submit a legislative proposal this year requesting expanded usage of the Nevada Test and Training Range located in my district.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we need to understand the recruiting and retention challenges that the Department of Defense faces this year, and I'm not sure if all the answers provided thus far have clarified it yet. So have a couple questions on that. The Army's decided to cut active duty strength by 12,000 soldiers in fiscal year 23. Undersecretary Gabe Camarillo said last week, he said, quote, like every other employer in the economy, we're facing some challenging conditions in terms of our ability to recruit and attract talent. Given the particular conditions of a very tight labor market, our ability to meet all of our projected recruiting goals were a little bit challenged, unquote. Do you agree with Secretary Camarillo's assessment that it's the tight labor market that's the primary driver of recruitment challenges, at least for the Army?
Thanks, Congressman. I think actually there are a number of things that go into this equation. The fact that unemployment is below 4% is a key issue. But also, if you take a look at the impact of COVID over the last couple of years, as you know, our recruiters recruit a lot of kids out of high school, and those high schools have been in session on an infrequent basis in terms of actual physical presence there. So it's made things more complicated. Chairman mentioned a smaller population to recruit from. So as we combine all of those things, then there are headwinds, and it will be there will be headwinds for all of the services going forward.
I think that's true, but I want to acknowledge here that the objective facts, if we review the objective facts, I think the largest headwind is inescapably the reaction that DoD took to COVID. Let me provide some stats. 2 years ago, right before the pandemic struck, we had the greatest economy in the history of the world. There were recruitment challenges, there have been for many years, but we didn't have the budget request proposing to cut 12,000 soldiers from the Army like this year's budget asked. So what's changed over the last 24 months? It's the department's COVID vaccine mandate, and there's just no way around it. I mean, some have alluded to it already today, but requiring young men and women to take the vaccine has disqualified a huge portion of the population from military service. And here's some proof. Nationwide, more than 40% of males aged 18 to 24 have chosen not to become fully vaccinated, and as a result, they're now ineligible to join the military, right? Off the bat, that's 40% of the target demographic that's immediately ineligible to serve. I mean, this is just a fact. In the southeast portion of the country, where I'm from, that number is even greater. According to CDC, 52% of 18 to 24-year-old men in that region have chosen not to receive the vaccine. So why does that specific geographic region matter so much? What makes the Southeast important is that according to Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, southern states produced nearly 47% of military enlistments in 2019. That's Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Virginia, Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Fertile ground for DoD recruiters. But these states send their sons and daughters to serve the nation at drastically higher rates than other states do. They contain only 38% of 18 to 24-year-olds in America, but they account for nearly half of all the enlistments. So I understand what's being said about the tight labor market and the inability to meet fitness standards and all the rest, but it's pretty plain, if we look at this, that DoD is having a recruiting and retention crisis because it has disqualified over half of the male population from serving in the military in its best recruiting grounds, and nearly 40% of men and women aged 18 to 24 nationwide. And then we're adding fuel to the crisis because there's this charade about the religious exemption process for service members, and I believe it's blatantly unconstitutional. Let me ask you quickly in the time that remains, in light of the obvious impact on recruitment and retention, does the department have any plans to repeal or modify the current COVID vaccine requirement?
I do not.
Let me ask you if you can tell us how many religious exemptions to the COVID vaccine have been granted across all services. And I'll note that in February, 15 exemptions were granted out of 16,000 applications.
Okay, I'm going to take that question and other COVID questions for the record. As you know, this is an issue in litigation, and so I'll take your questions for the record.
Well, in the 40 seconds I have remaining, I'll just state the obvious, what a lot of people back home are asking me and asking all of us, and that is, if it's so obvious that a vaccine mandate is causing this deficit in the number of troops, then why don't we just change it? I mean, COVID seems to be behind us.
I certainly disagree with your premise.
Well, I know you do, but I mean, obviously it's having a direct effect on our numbers of recruitment and retention and readiness, which is of great concern to all of us. And I know you're not going to change your mind here today, but I'm registering the concern of my district and many millions of Americans that we represent who share this opinion, and I hope that you'll take it under advisement. I yield back.
Thank you. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that I'm really concerned about, Secretary Austin and General Milley, is that across the DOD, I continually hear people talk about divesting of things for future things, future capabilities for current. And General Milley, I've heard you say this. I learned this from you. We have to be able to fight today with the things, fight tonight with the things that we have right now. And so I see that we're talking about the Marine Corps says they need 31 amphib ships. Yet we're saying we're only going to give you 24. We're only building 9 ships, and we're divesting of 24 and capabilities. It's a sliding scale of risk. KC-46s are not coming online, not providing all the capabilities we need in a timely enough manner, but yet we're talking about divesting of the KC-135s. So we continue to divest in things. The same thing with the Slickum. If we have another capability that provides that same thing in the same region, then we need to do that. So listen, I know everybody's heart's in the right place, but I just think we have to be very careful. Now we have a war with Russia and Ukraine, and relooking these things to see, do we have the capability? Should the world ask that we fight 2 wars on 2 fronts, whether that's ships and current capabilities or refueling aircraft. The other thing I'm extremely concerned about, Secretary Austin, and I think this is something you can fix, is our merchant marine fleet, our ability to move ships, troops, equipment, fuel, all kind of logistics. We keep pushing that. That's not just a Navy function. It's the Army that has to have those goods. It's the Marine Corps. And so we really have to look at this, and we have to invest in our merchant marine fleet to be able to get us what we need when we do it. What are you doing to get our merchant marine fleet set at a DOD level? Because I can tell you the services are always going to say the other one needs to pay for it.
We have not invested invested any monies in this budget towards a merchant marine fleet, but you make some good points.
But we need to, you would agree that logistic chain, I mean, the reason the Russians are getting their tail kicked in Ukraine right now is a logistical failure. And if we don't plan to do logistics, I promise you, it will not happen. I want to go back with KC-135s. Are you willing, General Milley, Secretary Austin, to relook the divestiture of KC-135s until we have adequate capability to refuel to both Indo-Pacific and also Europe? Are you willing to relook that and not divest until we have capabilities replaced?
I would be happy to relook anything in the budget that you want me to relook, and I'll take a look at that and get with the Air Force and make sure that I clearly understand the divestiture logic and the production rates of the KC-46.
And then I just really hope you will relook the ship plan. I mean, the Marines say they need 31 amphibs, yet DOD says we're only going to give you 24. And I disagree with the chairman a little bit on this. We do have the capability to produce those ships, but it's about keeping the workforce engaged and making sure that we have a timeline and we don't change that every year so that they can plan out to having the right industrial base at the right time. So I hope we will get, I haven't seen a ship plan in 2 years from the Navy, and that is one of the requirements that they're supposed to do. We need that in order to do our job.
Thanks, sir. That's forthcoming. And also, they've done an amphib review, and that's forthcoming as well. And once that's done, I think we'll have greater insights into what the Secretary of the Navy really believes the requirements are. I would just point to the fact, and I know you know this, that we're investing $2.6 billion in amphibs in this budget. Amphibs are important. There's no question about it. we're going to make sure that
Mr. Secretary, and I hate to interrupt, but I got 1 minute and I got one more question I really want to talk about. I really just hope you guys are the advisor to not just the president, but to the nation in making sure that we have the right risk of fighting today versus future capabilities that we have to win future wars. And I just hope that we'll relook some of those things. Final point I want to talk about, there's a little bit of movement right now, and I just ask that both of y'all weigh in on this. To make Gold Star families, to include a Gold Star to make them someone who dies in service. If I die of a heart attack while I'm doing guard drill, my family is not a Gold Star family. I shouldn't get a Purple Heart for having an ATV wreck downrange. That is not to denigrate anyone from not doing that. We love all our service members, however they die, but I really hope you'll look hard at making sure our Gold Star families are Gold Star families who are lost in combat.
And I am doing that, personally doing that. And today is Gold Star Spouses Day, Gold Star Family Day, by the way. And there's nothing probably more important or sacred than to make sure that we honor those fallen in combat in the defense of this nation. So I am looking at
Gentleman's time is recognized for 5 minutes. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary Austin, General Milley, and Mr. McCord for appearing before us today. I very much appreciate the challenging times that you and the department are in right now as we are facing and watching the horrific events of the war in Ukraine unfold. I also know that the department's budget request this year is focused largely on modernization and transformation of the force. And in your written testimonies, you have mentioned how the department has to modernize and divest from legacy platforms that may no longer meet the needs of the force right now here in this country. President Zelensky has repeatedly called on the United States to transfer aircraft and other weapon systems to Ukraine, and so here we potentially have supply with a known demand. Is there anything that is preventing the Department of Defense from transferring legacy weapon systems, and I'll just give an example as the A-10, and other excess defense articles to Ukraine? Or are there any things that are preventing us for the training, preventing the training for those? Is there any additional authority that you need to be able to expedite or approve transferring of weapon systems to Ukraine? Secretary Austin.
At this point, there are no additional authorities that we need, and certainly if we need additional authorities, we won't hesitate to come ask you for them.
Thank you. And with my next question, as we do identify weapons and systems that we can or are interested in divesting in, is there a process by which we can conduct due diligence to identify possible items for transfer to Ukraine, or to Mr. Waltz's point, to be more thoughtful about the future of other possible conflicts?
It'll be based upon their request and our assessment of what we have available. Also, the threat in the environment plays a big part of this. The ability to maintain the capability that we give them is also very, very important, and the ability to train on those on that equipment is also key.
And so using as the A-10 is just an example, and knowing that we originally anticipated that this war would be a matter of days and hours rather than now months and possibly years, using that A-10 as an example, is there a possibility of what is the department plan for the 21 A-10s that are in the plan right now to divest from Fort Wayne, and what is the condition of those aircraft?
Yeah. Again, it's not just exporting the A-10.
Sure.
It's also whether or not that aircraft can survive in that environment, which is a key issue. And then number two, whether or not they can sustain the aircraft once we provide it to them. It is completely different, as you know, from any platform that they have or currently using. And so this is a big step. And then training the pilots. It's not a matter of days. This is a matter of months.
Yes. Yes, sir. And I actually have done some investigation, and I think that we're on the same page, that our understanding is on the order of magnitude of a couple of months. And I know the anticipation was that this would not last that long, but it's clear that it might still. And again, the A-10 is just an example of something that we might be looking into. And with the remainder of my time, we are now in the 5th week with no apparent end, and we need to make sure that we're coming to terms with the fact that this could be longer than we anticipated. I'm interested in the planned reduction of end strength across the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. The Navy, as we know, is already short of personnel in sea duty billets. The Air Force is suffering from a critical shortage of pilots. How does the department forecasting and planning for this prolonged war in Ukraine? Maybe General Milley, we could ask you that particular question.
Well, first, we are not directly engaged in combat operations in Ukraine. We are conducting deterrence and assurance operations in the periphery countries, the Article 5, NATO Article 5 countries. Having said that, in terms of the end strengths and the modest reductions in end strengths of each of the services, what the services have opted to do is reduce end strength a little bit in order to recoup savings, in order to modernize the force, aiming towards a 2030 timeframe, 2030 plus. And that's where you see these modest reductions in end strength. And that's, I mean, what they're trying to do is focus on China and Russia secondarily as the two principal threats in order to modernize and upgrade their force.
Yeah, and I think where my interest is that my understanding is that we haven't accounted for what might be a continued and increased presence in Europe in our force reduction planning.
Yeah, the force posture, the long-term force posture in Europe is yet to be decided. It's under debate right now. It's under review. NATO plays a big part in that, and General Walters will be making his recommendations as Secretary on that. But clearly, because of the war in Ukraine, there's at least a possibility, if not a probability, of an increased force presence over a lengthy period of time. That doesn't have to be stationing. That can be rotational. It can be a lot of different ways.
Thank you, gentlemen. I yield back.
I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. At Tuesday's Senate Appropriations Committee hearing, Senator Tammy Baldwin questioned Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on the U.S. response if Putin used tactical nuclear weapons. Secretary Austin said that the international response would be, quote, significant. Take a listen to his full response here.
Senator Baldwin. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, welcome. A healthy defense industrial base is a critical element for our national security. And President Biden issued an executive order in January of 2021 to strengthen Buy America requirements for all federal programs. In July, a notice of proposed rulemaking increased the domestic content requirement from 55% to 60%, with a phased-in increase to 75%. This is a move I strongly support. However, I know from the experience with the Navy's new frigate that if we require 100% American-made within a reasonable timeline, industry can step up and deliver. With the frigate, this actually resulted in the onshoring of new U.S. manufacturing. So do you support replicating this success for other defense programs with the goal of hitting 100% American-made, so long as the department has reasonable timelines and reasonable waivers at their disposal?
Yeah, I absolutely support making sure that where we can, we invest in America, that we make sure that we have the supply lines available to do the things that you just described. And so you're right. The president has an initiative that he launched a while back, and DOD is a strong partner in that initiative to ensure that we strengthen our supply lines, that we make sure that we have the critical materials available to build and the types of munitions and platforms that we think we'll need going forward. So yes, I support that. So.
Thank you. General Milley, I understand you had a version of this question asked already, so I'm going to try to take it in a little bit different direction. But Ukraine has far exceeded most expectations over 2 months into this most recent phase of Putin's war. I support providing the Ukrainians with the capabilities that they need to defend their sovereignty, and hope that we can quickly pass a Ukraine supplemental that fulfills President Biden's request. It's clear that this conflict may extend for some time. As you talk with Ukrainian counterparts, I know you've been asked what a realistic end state is for Ukraine. I'd like to ask a little differently is what does a realistic military success or end state look like for the United States? And how will our security assistance need to change at this new phase in order to support those goals?
Thanks, Senator. the end state has been articulated by the President, Secretary of Defense, Secretary Blinken, several different times. And what it is maintain the cohesion of NATO, make sure that Ukraine, at the end of the day, ends up as a free, sovereign nation with the territorial integrity intact. No kinetic war between NATO and the United States and Russia, so no action between our military forces specifically, and continue to support the Ukrainian people with what they need to defend themselves. So that's what we're trying to do, and we need to, at the end of the day, what's it all about? It's all about the rules-based international order has been grossly violated by Russia with an illegal, aggressive action by military forces across the sovereign border. We have had a set of institutions in place for 78 consecutive years to prevent that very thing from happening, and that's what's at stake. It's beyond Ukraine is what's at stake, and our intent is to maintain and uphold the rules-based international order by achieving those specific objectives the President's given us.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, on this topic, some analysts believe that the more we assist Ukraine in degrading Putin's military, the more likely he will be to escalate to new levels, possibly with chemical, biological, or even tactical nuclear weapons. Can you clarify how this might change the calculus that General Milley was just outlining in terms of use of force from the U.S. military?
Yeah, there are a number of things that Mr. Putin could do. You could make the case, by the way, Senator, that he's already escalated in terms of the types of things that we see him doing in attacking civilians, destroying cities, towns, and villages, indiscriminate targeting. Certainly, he has a number of things that he could do. He could, escalate by conducting a cyber event, or there's been a lot of talk about the possible employment of chem bio. Of course, if he employs a chemical, biological, or weapon, I think he will see a reaction from the international community, and because that's a pretty serious step. And of course, President Biden's been clear about his views on this. So it's possible that he could do that. I certainly hope that he chooses to not do that. Again, I think the international response will be significant. But Senator, he could end this war today.
Yes.
He chose. This is a war of choice. He could choose to stop fighting and withdraw his forces from Ukraine. And again, this is the decision of one man. And so I would hope that Mr. Putin would decide to do something different going forward.
Yes, and I just want to close with, should Putin continue to escalate, is it your expectation that the administration would come to Congress requesting an authorization for use of military force?
That's a policy decision that my boss will make, and so I won't get in front of my boss. So.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Question for both of you. What weapon systems does Ukraine need, and need the most and need the soonest that they don't have?
What they've asked for, Senator, is long-range fire capability, and we're providing that, as you've seen, with most recently 90 155 systems.
And they're capable of using them, or do they need to be trained on them?
They're using them now. They're using them as we speak. As you may know, we took a number of troops out and trained them up very quickly on 155s, put them back into action, and they are employing those weapon systems now. They have the ammunition that we're providing them, and other countries are providing them 155 capability as well. They've also asked for armor capability, tanks and armored vehicles, and countries in the region are providing that. And as we witnessed in our meeting that we held in Ramstein a week ago, countries like Canada and Germany are stepping up, providing armored vehicle capability, and so their capability overall is increasing. And again, they put the stuff that we provided them to very good use, in addition to the UAVs that we're also providing.
General, same question?
Yeah, same thing, Senator. I talk to my counterpart literally every other day, and we work very, very hard to get him what he thinks he needs. Long-range fires, specifically cannon artillery and rocket artillery. They were used to using the old Soviet model 152 artillery. Ammunition became a problem, so we're moving to a NATO standard. So the United States and many of our allies and partners are providing him with multiple battalions worth of 155 cannon and the ammunition to go with it, plus the radars, plus the fire direction center, the entire package for effective use of fires. That's the most important thing right now in the current fight. Secondly is to continue to sustain them on anti-tank weapons, very effective, anti-aircraft weapons, ground-based, either SAMs and or man-pads. Those are probably the top three, and then the number four would be his ground maneuver capability of tanks and mech infantry vehicles, which many countries are now helping to contribute as well. So those would be the top four. There's a whole laundry list below that, but those are the top four.
Looking at what the Ukrainians have done to the Russian tanks with our javelins, do we have something that is going to ensure that the tanks we provide are able to defeat that same type of shoulder-mounted threat and truly be effective?
The tanks that have been provided to them, Senator, have been tanks that they're accustomed to using, and that they have the maintenance capabilities to maintain. So we've seen tanks, a number of tanks being provided by countries like Poland and others that are in the neighborhood, and again. Russians don't have something that approaches the Javelin, okay. So that's...
All right. So then, next question. Have we fully utilized the funds that we've already provided such that you need this, and when do you need this supplemental? And have we really focused on the lethal aid versus getting other things in this $33 billion supplemental?
Yeah, we absolutely have focused on the lethal aid, Senator, and we're at the very end of our drawdown capability here. So we're very quickly going to run out of funds. So.
Okay. General, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's clear to me that the monies that Congress has provided is overwhelmingly in support of lethal aid. There's no question about it. It's almost all lethal aid, actually.
I'm switching gears here, more along the lines of Senator Graham. Are you both, this is a question for both of you, are you both fully committed to upgrading, updating, and modernizing our nuclear triad, and is the funding in this budget adequate to do that?
$34 billion allocated to that effort in this budget, and yes, Senator, I am absolutely fully committed to modernizing the triad.
100%. It's the number one priority in this budget, and it'll have to be sustained over time in future budgets, but that has ensured the protection of the United States for many, many years, and we need to reinvest and recapitalize it. It's number one.
Thank you. I appreciate that and agree 100%. Final question. Are you familiar with Sky Range, for developing the Sky Range system to test hypersonics as a way to actually do it rather than lining up naval ships and trying to do it, and do you support it, including using the Global Hawks for that purpose?
I am familiar with it, Senator, and yes, I do support it. And again, the Air Force will continue to work to make sure that the right capabilities are in place to support that effort.
Same.
Thank you. Appreciate it.